All right, here we go. Welcome, everyone. It is Tuesday, July 21st, and welcome to our audio community plugin here at Avid. My name is Greg Chin. I am the audio evangelist for Avid, and it is great to be back with you guys. We've been doing these community plugin webinar type events pretty much every other Tuesday now. So we've got a pretty good, a really good cadence running. I'm very happy to be with you. I've been scrolling through our attendees list. Great to see some familiar names returning. Great to see some brand new folks here with us for the first time. So wherever you might be in the world, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is a pleasure. It is a real honor to have you guys with us. We have an amazing panel for you today, and I can't wait to jump right into that. But just before I do that, I want to just kind of go through a little bit of housekeeping. And first and foremost, wherever in the world you might be, I hope that you're all staying safe. This is kind of a crazy time we find ourselves in, and I do hope that everyone's keeping safe and your families and your loved ones are well, and that you're doing well and fine yourselves. So please stay safe, which is kind of why we're doing these. We want to still remain engaged with all of you guys who are our big advocates and supporters, our customers and our clients, and all of our Avid fans and friends all over the world. So thank you guys. So like I said, we've got a great panel for you today. We're going to be covering remote music mixing, and we're going to jump into that in just a second. But before I do that, let me just quickly, just so you guys can get the best out of the webinar for your Zoom experience. Of course, we do have folks that are watching live on other platforms like Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook. So we welcome all of you. But for those of you who registered specifically for the event, you're here on Zoom. And to make sure that you get the best out of the webinar, just a couple things I'd like to point out. So we do have a panel today. So we're going to have several different speakers, and they're going to, be talking with each other. Robert Miller, our esteemed audio specialist, is going to be leading that. But there's going to be a very kind of a roundtable type conversation that happens. So what you might want to do is on the top right-hand corner of your Zoom application, you might want to ensure that gallery view is selected. That gives you kind of the whole experience of seeing everyone. So you'll be able to kind of see them talk back and forth naturally. Of course, if you do want to just see whoever's speaking at the time, you can enable speaker view. But for this, I do recommend gallery view. You also, with so many people being in the room, the gallery view can take up a ton of room, and you'll see a lot of little squares with a lot of folks. So what I would recommend is that you select that any non-video participants are hidden. So you can select that same place, just top right-hand corner, these three little dots. Select that. That'll bring up a window with some options, and you can select hide non-video participants. Okay. We're going to be taking some Q&A throughout the course of the event. So myself, Gil Gowing, who many of you are familiar with, we're going to be handling moderation of the Q&A ourselves. Really, probably more Gil, because Gil has all the answers. I have maybe a couple. Gil's got all the answers. We're going to be answering questions as we go along. We do ask, again, this is a safe space, but we do ask that you be you're respectful of each other, of our guests, of everyone involved. Ask what you need to ask. If you can, we'd like to keep it focused on the topic at hand that our guests are going to be talking through. So if you have any questions, please do ask. We do have a very specific time for Q&A that you're going to be able to ask questions via myself and Gil in the chat, and we'll bring those questions to our panel. But throughout the course of the event as well, if you want to ask some questions of myself and Gil, we'll be happy to answer. So how do you do that? You can submit your questions simply by clicking on the Q&A icon in the menu bar, type your question, and that'll go right over to us. We'll do our very best to get to as many as we possibly can. We can't get to every single one, but we'll do our very, very, very best. So with that, we've got a really amazing panel. We're going to be covering remote mixing of music. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my dear friend, Mr. Robert Miller, one of our top Avid audio application specialists. And he's going to introduce our guests. And Robert, take it away.
Well, thank you, Greg, and welcome everybody. Great to see you all again. And I just might say that one of the benefits of my 25 plus years at Avid in New York City is getting to know and in some small way work with the most talented creative audio professionals. And we've invited two of them and their assistants today for our panel on remote music mixing. And what's interesting to me is that they both work with Pro Tools HD in a hybrid style of in-the-box and choice analog outboard gear. And both of them have Avid S6 consoles, and they also use the new S1s as well. And each work closely and remotely with their clients and trusted assistants to prepare and deliver their mixes. So please welcome Michael Brower and his assistant Fernando Reyes, and Yaron Fuchs and his assistant Spencer Hattendorf. So I'm just going to ask Michael to give a little bit of background and talk about anything you'd like to in terms of this topic today and how you work with Fernando. So take it away.
Hi everybody, I'm Michael Brower. I've been doing this for a long time, going on 43 years, and I've certainly seen a lot of transitions. I never thought the day would come that I would actually even consider hybrid, much less in the box, but technology has a way of making things, one, affordable, and two, sounding so good that you question whether you're listening to analog or digital. And that's, that's the way things should be going and progressing. I started at Media Sound mixing R&B and worked my way through a lot of many different styles. And through all of this, I always had a great team around me, a great assistant. And the one you're about to meet today is Fernando Reyes, who comes from Peru. And I met him at Electric Lady. He was reception. At reception, I'd see him every day, and he had a nice smile, and he'd say, "Good morning, Michael." "Good morning, Fernando." And then one day I was looking around, I was like, you know what? I think it's time we start training a new assistant. And we'd gone through a couple of people. Wasn't happy with them. And one morning I said, "Fernando, you interested?" He's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Well, all right. So come on down. Let's see how you are." And he pretty much knew nothing, which is the way I like it. I'd rather teach someone my whole approach and have my assistant, teaching him the way we like to work than coming in and having to try and, reteach people and break bad habits and stuff. He had no habits at all. So it was perfect. And so that's where we're at. Oh, my dog is coughing. That's not me. So that's it in a nutshell. Fernando, say hi.
Hello, everybody. I'm Fernando. I'm Michael's assistant. I've been working with Michael for 4 years now. Like he said, I'm from Peru originally. I moved to the States in 2013. I went to school for audio engineering. And then I moved to New York early 2015. I got an internship at Electric Lady. And I was, cleaning bathrooms and answering the phones and working reception. And then I got hired there. And then I was in charge of training the new interns and, setting up the rooms. And then when I met Michael invited me to start training with him. Was the first time that I really got into the room and actually started doing sessions. And I've been with him ever since.
Wow, that's great. So maybe Yaron, you can give us a little bit of background and Spencer, introduce Spencer too.
Hi, I'm Yaron Fuchs, and I came to New York in the early 80s to go to school. Went to Columbia University, and my entrance into music was a little bit different. I studied music and computer science in 1984 when this thing called the Macintosh computer was invented. And I was lucky enough to get my hands on one very early on. And my introduction came actually through technology. Um, I met Paul de Benedictis and the people at Vision early on in the 80s, and through them I met the people at DigiDesign in 89 when Sound Tools came out. And I was very deep into the music scene, the live music scene in New York, so I met all the great musicians, and I actually cut my teeth editing Pro Tools for people and trading them time to learn how to produce records and how to mix records until I bought a studio of my own. With Lou Holtzman, I bought Eastside Sound, and then with Bob Brockman, I had New Media. And when the music business started to collapse, I built a room in my garage, and I'm sitting in it right now. It's been 14 years now, and I couldn't go back. I met Spencer. He was an artist in a band. First of all, I divide my time evenly between producing, mixing, and developing artists. Spencer was in a band that I got hired to make a record for. He wrote most of the music, and I thought he was extremely talented, multi-instrumentalist. And throughout the year that we were working developing his act, he was with me in the studio a lot. And I saw how quickly he learns everything. And at the end of the project, he came to me and said, I kind of like making records more than I want to sit in a van and be a rock star. Can I work with you? And I said, sure. And that's where it all started. And Spencer, go for it.
Hi, everybody. I'm Spencer Hattendorf. And as Yaron said, I came to him from the artist side. I came to New York in about 8 years ago. I came to, pursue the dream of being a rock star, played in bands, a lot of shows down on the Lower East Side and in Brooklyn. And then through the process of my band making our record, came into contact with Yaron. I had never even really used Pro Tools before, but through working with him, I got to get exposure to the side of what it's like being behind the console and being behind the computer desk. And that was just a much better fit for me than, playing live. And I still love the composition and producing side, but fortunately don't have to do much of the touring anymore. So yeah, that's mine.
Well, it sounds like you ended up in the right place. So I guess we're going to kick it off with a few questions. And again, we're going to have some time a little bit later on in the program to kind of answer the questions that are coming and being fielded from the folks on Zoom and other social platforms. But Michael and Yaron, prior to this, current, lockdown of the COVID pandemic, I'm sure you both used remote workflows. So how do you kind of work with your assistants? You're not in the same place, right? And how are you kind of going back and forth with the technology, today?
Ron, you want to start?
Sure. We've been doing this for a long time. Most of my clients are actually overseas. So I started working remotely with people quite a while ago. And we're set up in 3 studios, actually. The main room I'm sitting in right now, which is the big hybrid room with the S6 and all the analog gear. But I also have a room at my beach house, which is a remote room, which is identical to Spencer's room. And we set up templates that transfer from room to room really, really easily. Spencer sets everything up. He can control my computer wherever I am, however he wants to. He can hear everything through audio movers, listen to, or Source Connect, or whichever way, shape, and form that we use. And Spencer, why don't you explain how you do all of our setup and, how we talk to each other?
Sure. So if we're talking about a mix, the first thing that we'll do is when we get files from a client, we have a sheet that explains our delivery intake process. So there's a standard protocol of things, things like naming conventions. We make sure that if they have any effects that they're rendered, so we get wet and dry stems from people. And then once we get all those stems, I'll go through and import them into an empty session and just listen to the rough mix versus the stems that are there and make sure that everything sounds the same. Ideally, if the client has printed a rough mix, it should sound the same as all the stems that are up if they've rendered their effect. So I just check, do a listen through to make sure that everything is there. Once we get that, I'll then import it into the template that Yaron was just talking about, which is it, we're able to kind of move from room to room because the outputs that we have routed, it goes into my outputs. I have a Apollo Twin in my studio, but the system that Yaron has at his studio has 32 outputs. So it's routed into both of those things. So we can transfer from place to place. Once I get the stems into our template, I'll go through and label everything appropriately. I'll condense some of the tracks if we can, in case there's, if the client gives us 100 tracks and there's really only 6 instruments, it's, a little bit easier to give them a more manageable track count. I'll go through and make sure that there's no, noticeable audio distortion where there shouldn't be. So particularly on a vocal, if we get a vocal, I'll make sure that doesn't have any clicks or pops, either through RX or doing it by hand. And then once everything is set into our template, we use the new folder system in Pro Tools. Everything is color coded correctly. And then I'll go through and rename tracks appropriately. Yaron's working on the S6 console, as Robert mentioned earlier. And when he makes his views on the console, I try to make the track names as short as possible so he can easily see what each individual instrument is. And then I'll go through, after everything is set up and routed appropriately, I'll go through and do another check to make sure that all the routing is correct. So I'll listen to the rough mix against the stems that we've imported. And listening on the broadcast channel, we can trigger, excuse me, we can trigger input monitoring in and out. So if the rough mix is just on the print channel, I can kind of click in between it really easily, a little bit like the way that people might use like metric AV. And then once I've gone through and done that, if everything sounds the same, I'll pull all the faders back, bring things up slowly, make sure that there's no frequencies that don't need to be there. So I'll go through and do either a high pass or low pass. That's nothing too crazy, but just enough to get rid of some of the gunk in there that Yaron doesn't need to hear. Get it to a point where the mix sounds to my ears hopefully better than what the rough mix sounds like, so that Yaron can get inspired. Our template has built into it all sorts of compressors, reverbs, delays, any kind of effects that he's going to use in the mix. Particularly if he's going to use analog gear, I'll go through and we have typically all of our hardware sends routed the same way. So if he's going to use distressor on something, for example, I'll go through and on the hardware insert, I'll put the plugin version on there. And then if he wants to use the real thing, he can just take the plugin off. Once it's set out to a good spot and it feels like it's in, it's sounding good, then I'll send him the session and we'll be, ready to go.
Cool. Michael, how about some similar kind of workflow for you guys?
I would just say, yeah, just listen to what they just said. It's almost exactly the same. I started, like Yaron, I've been doing remote. Boy, I remember the first record I did was James Morrison. So I'm trying to think what year that would have been in. That would have been, I don't know, early 2000. I mean, it had just, Nicecast had literally just come out, a month before, and I had to mix a record, and the producer was in New York with me, and the artist and the manager and the label, I mean, the whole party was on the other side, and I was like, okay, I have to get each one of these mixes approved and make the changes in real time. Otherwise, it's just going to be too lengthy a process. And so it was very nerve-wracking at first because that system, Nicecast, it worked, but it buffered a lot. So you'd have to keep turning it off and turning it back on because, the video was fine, but the music kept getting more and more late, so I'd hit stop and then, about a minute later, the music would stop and they'd always be going, hey, I told you to stop. I go, I did stop. Okay. So, but it worked. and it was incredible. You know, there I had FaceTime or Skype, whatever I was using at the time, probably Skype. I don't think FaceTime was around yet. And that was it for me. And it, you know, in the beginning, it felt a bit unnatural, but within minutes, really, you forget that they're not in the room with you because you're communicating, you're getting the job done. And, you know, and the days of a client, I mean, there was a time when the artist always showed up for the mix. Always. It was the most important part of the record. I mean, the idea that they wouldn't show up, you know, is about as foreign as the idea that I'd be mixing in the box right now. You know, I mean, it just was never going to happen. And then I think about the time when budgets died and, you know, and just a lot of people had, yeah, a lot smaller budgets. They couldn't travel, or their managers were mixing up their rehearsal schedule on top of what the mixing schedule was going to be, and then the label wanted them out on the road. They just weren't available as much. And so, you know, there was that transition where I was still trying to hang on to them, and I'd say, please, you know, let's have a nice cast session. Let's talk. Let's imagine that you're still here. I finally gave up on that, but you know, those were the early days, and the only difference between then and today is now the technology is a lot better. For audio, Nicecast went under. We have audio movers, correct, Fernando? Audio movers?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, and then TeamViewer. So now he sees, you know, sees the screen, and the only difference now is, yeah, I can be here and my assistant can still be logged in, can still be working with me. I'll have FaceTime or something sitting on my phone or my laptop. So he's there all the time, you know, and when I need him, I just unmute, say, hey. But otherwise, he sees exactly what I'm doing, and he's just kind of sits there like we are right now and just follows what's going on. And then, you know, if I have a question or I want him to do something, clean up something, you know, he's right there. Boom, he does it all in real time. There's no lag. Obviously, you need good Wi-Fi. Assuming you do, then everything is smooth. And, you know, I mean, for me, the transition, having left Electric Lady and deciding I was going to leave behind the analog desk, that portion of analog, took a long time. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think I was always the last of my friends, you know, to join the party, you know, to go hybrid. But I knew it was important. But and we can discuss, Yaron and I probably will give the same reasons why we went hybrid. But you know, a lot of it isn't just, well, it's more efficient. There's a lot of reasons, including recalls and demands and all other types of stuff, which we can get into today. But, you know, the first time we really used it was because of COVID. And New York City was getting way too hot to be in there. And I don't mean by temperature. And so I took everything from actually Fernando's room, which is all in the box. I put it in a car and I brought it up here down to my basement, and which happened to be a perfectly built room that was my kids' dens. And, you know, and I threw them out and put my stuff in there, took hostage, and it sounded great. And the first thing I did was like, okay, so now what do we do? And we had sound movers, and we had on TeamViewer, we had everything, and within minutes, it felt natural. You know, it's like, okay, well, it's as good as him being, you know, next to me, because he is, he is next to me. It's unbelievable because of the technology, how easy I was able to transition and continue doing what I'm doing in a completely different place, and yet still come out with exactly the product I wanted without any compromise. That that's unbelievable. And that's because, people have been out there working hard to bring the technology right up to the needs of mixers and producers and musicians. And yeah, and so I mean, from my end, it's been absolutely seamless. And fortunately, I had already been working, learning how to do hybrid back when I was still at Electric Lady, taking it half seriously because my main room was the analog, right? But I was learning by doing smaller projects, learning how to set up my template that I had, developed over the years of Rauerized thing, trying to figure out how to make that in a hybrid. That wasn't so difficult. And then when I went hybrid, I was like, okay, I guess I should learn to set it up in the box too. It's a natural, progression. And I didn't take that too seriously, but if I was teaching a seminar, I couldn't bring all this stuff anymore. So it was easy just to kind of describe it, in a template, and well, this is what its function is, and so on and so forth. And again, I would do little projects just to learn. I'm hybrid. I'm happy now. I got all my gear, and whatever, And suddenly, whatever became what.
We're happy you're happy, and
And so,
maybe you're on. Maybe you want to talk a little bit. I think you probably use some of those same, the exact same things. We've talked in the past using Zoom and audio movers and similar kind of like way of kind of breaking down the walls of the studio and using remote workflow.
Well, very similar. We've been doing this since before COVID this way. Since most of my clients are overseas, I never get to see them except for when I'm tracking with them. The way that we do it is I developed a system where I interconnect into my broadcast channel, which is the audio movers coming off of an aux. Since my microphone, and they can see my screen. We'll have a second camera up. They can see me and my screen and Spencer. And when we do recalls, basically what I do is I send them through FilePass. I send them FilePass is a program that basically lets you put comments straight into an MP3 or a WAV file, so that they don't tell me, raise the vocal at 2 minutes and 39 seconds. They just mark it and I can see what they want. And so I'll send them the first pass in FilePass and they'll mark it up. I'll fix it immediately. And then we basically get on the phone together. We get on a Zoom call together, and just like we're sitting here right now, I put my screen on in front of them. I let them hear everything, and we do everything in real time. And for me, what that did is, first of all, when you've got 10 people who are giving you comments, it could take weeks for them to get done. It drives you crazy, the amount of time that you spend just getting all that information together to open up and change it. And then the guitar player wants more guitar, the bass player wants more bass, the drummer wants more reverb on the snare drum. If you get them all together at the same time with the A&R guy, if there's an A&R guy, nowadays there isn't half the time, with the manager, with whoever else is involved, and we go online together as if they're sitting in the room in the old days, I find that we don't have a lot of recalls. We get it done, we print it, and we go off. And so we developed a system that we do that basically, just like we're sitting here right now, they're sitting with me in the mix and we're mixing. They can see my console, they can see the outboard gear, they can see them, they can see the screen. They can even control it. Sometimes they go, hey, can I have more guitar? I'll put the guitar in the fader update mode, turn it up, put the mouse right on top of it and say, put it where you hear it.
You're giving them control through the Zoom.
I don't care, because then I'll hear what they want. And then I'll put it in the right spot. But at least I'll see, what do they want, a half a dB more? Do they want a lot of reverb, a little bit of reverb? They can touch it. I put it in fader update mode. It doesn't have to write. I can just hear it and I can let them actually control it. Show me, show me exactly what you want. I'll be happy to do it. Just like in the old days, you'd say, you see this fader? Push it to where you like it, and let me know. I think it's just, for me, it makes it a lot easier. Also, when I have a monitor, I can see their face all the time. I make a change. With audio movers, it's a half a second off. So you know more or less what they're listening to. And I could see the reaction. I could see, oh, I like this. Oh, this sucks. And I know how to react and how to fix it on my own very, very quickly. I think it saves us a lot of headaches and it saves them a lot of money at the end of the day. And a lot of headaches and timing and so on and so forth. Nowadays, everybody calls you and they want their mix yesterday.
So there's one question here that's come in that's asking about, are all your files stored in a central place or do you sync, distribute them? I guess he's kind of, do you use the cloud in any way? Or is it like a Dropbox workflow where you're pushing and pulling?
Everything that we have is both local and on the cloud. Spencer has access to everything, whether it's on my backup drives that are sitting in the studio here or on the backups up in the cloud. We have I call it the large files Dropbox shared box, that whatever we're working on together at the same time is just sitting there. And I have all the audio locally, as does he, except for stuff that we bring back and forth. But everything is shared. Spencer has access to everything at all times from wherever he is in the world, as do I.
Okay.
Michael, you too? I'm wondering.
Yeah, pretty much. Fernando, why don't you answer that one since you're more technically minded?
Yeah, we don't store all our sessions in the cloud the same way because we are working remotely. Sessions that we're working on currently, like if I prep it on the rig that I have here in my apartment, then I'll drop it on our Dropbox account and then he has access on his computer and then he can work on it. But then when we finish with the session, we have 2 Ethernet servers and each one has like 50 or something terabytes. So we have like a main server where we back everything up and then we have a backup of that on a second Ethernet server. That's for the sessions. And then what we do keep in the cloud in Dropbox is all the mixes and all the mastering, so that Michael can access if he wants to listen to any of those or show it to somebody at any point. So that's how we do it.
Okay, well, that's, very, very similar. It seems like, with everyone here. I guess, what is the, maybe I know it's a little bit outside of the box, but what's your analog? What does the analog really bring for you in terms of the mix? And maybe you can talk a little bit about how those elements, those bits of analog gear kind of enhance your mixing.
Michael, you want to start? You're the king of that.
Well, that answer would have been a lot different 3 months ago. I discovered, look, one of the things, I'm sure Yaron will agree, when we went from mixing to tape to mixing to digital, to stereo, there was a concern because obviously tape offers a certain sound. But when you're growing up hearing what that sound should be, you instinctively start changing and doing things that give you the feel of what tape was giving you. And again, when I transitioned to hybrid, the things that the desk offered me, I was able to get the same feel by using SSL plugins. And now there's a lot of different companies that offered SSL. I listened to all of them. I ended up with one particular one that I liked, which happens to be Plugin Alliance. I put them across everything. And and it's great because let's say I wanted a Neve desk instead, which I grew up on. You know, I could just replace it all with a Neve. You know, and you get that, you know, the accumulated Neve feel to it. And again, I mean, I had always had a lot of analog at the end of the chain in my mastering chain, compressors and EQs. And at the end of all of that, I had SSL's Fusion, which I really, really love. And again, if you already own an SSL, you're not going to get much. You're going to say, I don't hear any difference. But if you don't have an SSL, I feel like the Fusion really, really helps. And it just, you know, it wasn't, I don't think it was ever like, oh my God, night and day. It was more like, it just has a little bit of a thing going on, and it can be 2%, 3%, but it's good enough. If it feels better, I leave it in. There's no difference, or I could, you know, it doesn't really work for the song, I take it off. So you know, it was always there. Coming up here and not having access to any of that, instinctively, I started searching for how to get that extra little thing that I normally would do once the mix was, you know, was ready and it was feeling great, and I would hit a button, an analog button. I started searching for things that would give me that same feel, but it was in a digital domain. It's, you know what you want to hear. So it's a natural tendency that you just search for it and you find one thing to replace another. I mean, if I went back and you know, put the Fusion across it, you know, would it sound better? It might sound different. I don't know, they would sound better, because at the point where I was happy with the mix, I'm happy with the mix. I don't try to overthink things, you know. It's like, this feels great to me. Okay, print and send. Let's go.
And we've got thousands of choices, right? Yaron, what about you? You, I know you've been using the new kind of the hybrid of
Yeah, it's for me,
the APB thing.
I learned, I have to first give kudos to Michael, because I learned a lot from him. Never been in the studio with him, but I've learned a lot from him throughout the years. I watched your videos. I love your, you know, your parallel vocal techniques and all sorts of stuff that I watched. Wow, that's kind of cool. And I tried playing with it and developing my own version. So I got to give him kudos for that.
Thank you.
For me, the analog gear, first of all, because we do a lot of tracking and overdubs as well, you need that for that. So let's put that aside. In the mixing process, stuff that we record on our own, I don't need much analog gear because it's embedded in. Stuff that I get from outside, you know, it's like when we used to get stuff on ADATs. I mean, oh God, you know.
Oh my, glad those days are over.
Right. So I sit around and I have basically output chains, whether it's like even a distressor on a snare drum or whatever it is, it's an output chain. And they're tone boxes for me. Compressors and EQs, the analog gear are tone boxes for me. And I run it through them and I commit right away and I create a new master. So for instance, you know, so there's certain things that I always want my analog gear on because I know how to get it real fast. You know, basically lead vocal, kick, snare, bass, maybe a guitar or two, you know. And I commit everything and I create a new master first and foremost. The other thing that I found is I discovered last AES a box called the APV16 by McDSP, which is probably the coolest piece of analog gear that I've ever owned outside of a Fairchild or something. Because it gives you 16 channels of analog compression or distortion, tone shaping ability. It's real analog, but it travels down a Thunderbolt cable and back. So it's sampler accurately locked and it's controlled by a plugin that's controlled by my console, just like, you know, just like anything else. And it's just recallable and it's there. And I got 16 of them and it's pretty awesome. You know, it's analog and you can hear the nonlinearity that we're always trying, you know. the plugins of the stuff that we use are so good right now that sometimes you can't tell the difference. But if you use 51176s by UAD, they're all the same. But if you would use 5 real 1176s, they're all going to be fucked up in a different way. Excuse my French. And that's what's kind of cool for me. That's the tone shaping side of it. An LA2A sounds like an LA2A, and every LA2A sounds different. And so I don't really use them as much for compression or for leveling audio, but for the tone that they add to the track. And then I commit it, and then for the rest, I just use plugins.
I agree completely with you on. I mean, when I first, obviously, as you know, up until recently, I must have had 50 compressors, and they weren't, you know, like, aren't you compressing a little too much? I'm like, I'm not. They're not working. They just, to me, they sound better than EQs. EQs are filters, and compressors are just natural tones. And if I wanted a vocal with more urgency, I could use one particular compressor. And, you know, and it's like, I would hear a vocal and I'm thinking, all right, oh, I would like something. And then I just scan through all my compressors, and then it's like a thumbprint, you know, that suddenly does a match, you know, it's like, bing, okay, Electrodyne, perfect, you know, and I would plug it in and it would feel great. Is it working? Well, Electrodyne tends to sound good when it's working, but there's others where, like my Aiwa, where there's just nothing going on. It's all the tubes and the iron and the stuff, and that's the tone, that's the sound. And then, you know, just like you do, then I print it right away, and then I move on, because that's now all I was looking for. And you know, right now I'm completely in the box. I have no access to any of my analog. I didn't sell all my analog gear. I just felt that I don't need it all anymore, because the major stuff I now can, it feels just as good, it sounds just as good as what I had before. But I still have a rack of my analog delays and my very, very rare compressors. Now, when I move back into the city and I move into my new room, that'll all be fired back up, and then I'll do exactly what Uran does, where I'll go, okay, great, you know, this is what I always use for my for my bass. You know, I'll plug it in, I'll print it. Now I got my bass sound, boom, done, you know, and of course, at that point, I don't have to be concerned about, you know, the length of time it takes to do a recall, because it's all printed. I'm not, you know, in the hybrid world, when I'm doing stems, we would have to, you know, do it in real time. And, you know, now, obviously, Fernando couldn't be any happier, because you know, he just hits a button and he's done, you know. But in the early days, when I was at Electric Lady, and I normally mix 2 songs a day, each stem, because they would do, like, I don't know, 48 sets of stems or something like that, because that's how many channels I had. You're looking at 3 hours of stems per song. So after I left at 8 or 9 o'clock, there's still another 6 hours to go for these guys, because I wasn't recalling back on the desk anymore. There was no reason for it, because it, you know, in the early days, again, you know, it was very convenient, because the artist showed up, you made your changes, you're done. Maybe they'd come back and say, you know, if I just hear one more thing. And then I started noticing they were less and less decisive. And they'd come back and I'd have to recall a song, like, back on the desk 2 or 3 times. You know, I'd have to dedicate 3 or 4 days just for recalls, as opposed to my being able to mix something else. So it was obvious that those days were over. I needed to be able to, you know, set up stems, and then when the recall came in, I was just working off the stems.
So we're gonna, you know, I'm sorry, I was just wanted to, you know, we're getting to about maybe 15, 13 minutes left here, and I wanted to kind of get to some of the questions that have been coming in from everybody? I'm sorry.
I just wanted to one thing that Michael said, and
Yeah.
we figured out a way that I'm actually using an SSL Sigma as my summer, quote unquote. And what's really cool about it is it gives you 32 direct outputs. So we run our stems live, one pass, boom, with analog, with everything. It's just the way that we set up the Sigma. You should check it out. It's pretty cool because you could take all your stuff and you could just send, your stereo drums, stereo bass, or mono bass, stereo guitar, stereo this. It's got direct outputs with 2 buses instead of 4 like you're used to, but 2 buses. And I got the Sigma at the end of it, and different transformers to change the mix on the mix bus, and so on and so forth. But for Fernando, he'll love you to death, is we hit record on our stem tracks at the same time as we hit record on our main mix. And we do 1 pass live, and we have all our stems, and then we do the instrumental acapella, blah, 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 which is 3 or 4 stems, no big deal. But, you should check that out. It's pretty cool.
Definitely.
So here's a question that's come in from Glenn Rosenstein down in Nashville. He says, creatively, what are the challenges for you feel-wise between having a client in the room with you versus working remotely? And he says, yes, I miss the hang in the room.
I can answer that. I don't feel any different anymore. I've been doing it for so long that within minutes, he's there, I see him, I hear him or her, and we just get to work. So, look, having a physical body next to you and being able to hang and just, shoot the crap for a while and just having a human in the room, that's nice. I'll never get tired of that. But in a work situation where we're trying to get this song sounding great and we're both focused on that, I don't feel like I'm compromised at all with this, remote system.
I could answer that too in a way. I do miss the days of the multi-room facilities where somebody's in the other room, knocks on the door, hey, how you doing? Checks out the mix, says how, so on and so forth. That's the camaraderie between other producers, other engineers, musicians, et cetera, et cetera. Of course you miss that. But in terms of finishing a mix, I don't know. I haven't seen a person in my studio, out of every 20 projects that I do, maybe once somebody shows up for a mix. Nobody has the time.
Agreed.
I guess I got used to it. If I didn't have Spencer with me, I think I'd go crazy because you're sitting in a room alone all day. Even when I have Spencer on the screen, it's kind of, he's like right next to me. A lot of times he's at the studio with me, hopefully soon again. But in terms of getting the feel for the artist, as long as I can see their face, then I get the feel of what they're trying to get.
Agreed.
So here's another question. I think you hit a little bit on this before you're on. It was like, where in the Pro Tools session do you place the Audio Mover plugin? Do you use a TalkBack mic in Pro Tools or a secondary service for voice communication?
Well, what I do is we have a folder called the print folder. Basically, because I go out of the box and come back into the box, I feed an aux in the box that gets all the summing of my mix coming off of the SSL with the outboard gear and whatever else we're using. And it comes into an aux, which is called a print aux. And that print aux feeds a bus, and that bus feeds an audio channel. So let's call it the print bus. Okay, feeds an audio channel, which is basically an input so I can hear what we're doing. In parallel to that, I created another aux called the broadcast aux. And that aux has, with everything off on it, it has audio movers, it has Source Connect, it has Source Live, it has every single form of broadcasting that that's out there so that I could satisfy a client, and they're basically deactivated. So if we're using audio movers, I activate audio movers, and it comes off of an aux channel called broadcast. It just feeds out, which is getting the exact same input as the final mix track.
Okay. So I guess there's a question here about clients working with 5.1 mixes. Do any of you work with 5.1? I know Audio Movers has kind of gone to a public beta with multi-channel stuff. I was just curious.
I did 5.1 yesterday, actually. Yeah, we're set up for 5.1, and I haven't done a broadcast in 5.1 yet because I didn't know how well the Audio Movers actually works. I have to have somebody with a 5.1 system on the other side to hear it. So we're still old school with 5.1. I send them bounces and they listen, in the meantime. But we are set up for 5.1. I do send them a fold back in real time so they can hear it in stereo, like a down mix, through Audio Movers if they'd like to do that. Or we go into Source Connect, and with Source Connect you can broadcast 5.1 with the video embedded.
Okay. So this is probably not coming in from it, but one of the things I wanted to hit, Yaron, you talked about, and I know we've talked about it, when you're working on maybe some pre-production using the Pro Tools Cloud collaboration. I know it's not there for full-on mixing, as it doesn't have all of the support for all of the tracks that are there with folder tracks and things like that now, but how have you used that in pre-production?
Well, I think Spencer can explain that a lot too. We haven't used it in a while because it kind of fell on the wayside, but we did a record for a band from the Czech Republic a couple of years ago where the client was in the Czech Republic. We were doing all the songwriting and all the pre-production out here with various people co-producing and co-writing with us in the Czech Republic. And we would set up, I would set up a master session here, and then we would send out files back and forth, through the cloud. And it was a little bit tough to deal with because you can't really see the files. They're all in the cloud, and then you got to download them and copy and save a copy as, and so on and so forth. But it was kind of cool because changes could be made to the same session you're working with. And, we've talked about this. I would love to see cloud collaboration built into the main portion of Pro Tools and work with local files with local names so that we know what's going on and file management isn't a nightmare. Lately, we've been just doing it more like when we're doing overdubs with people. I'd zoom in a session, send them a stem session, run it off of their computer. I would be listening and looking at their screen with Audio Mover talking to them. It's just like what we're doing on a mix. And we're actually producing vocals that way, or we do drums that way, or guitar overdubs that way right now until cloud collaboration catches up with Pro Tools.
That's
Cool.
clever.
Hey, Robert, we've actually got a couple of other questions. I know we're just almost to the top of the hour, but I'd love to get a couple more in. So first, again, thank you guys so much for this. This has been amazing. A lot of activity happening here in the chats. There are a couple questions that came in from some of the other social channels. So one of them was specifically for Yaron, which was, how's the Distressor plugin exchanged with the hardware on your setup? I guess this could be for Spencer or Yaron. Is it at the beginning or is it kind of on the fly?
What do you mean by beginning or on the fly?
I guess the chain. That's all I have here for the question.
Spencer knows my chains, my regular chains, and and so if I start a project and I decide, okay, let's just use the snare drum for instance. I'm going to use a Distressor and a 1081 on the snare drum. Then Spencer would put a Distressor and a 1081 in the order that I usually use them, which is normally EQ to compressor when I do a snare drum, and on the channel like a UAD plugin or whatever. We have the same plugins. And because a lot of times what I do is I set up my mixes at my beach house in another studio. And so I'll work in the box and get it really, really close. I come back over here and I go, okay, now I really want to use that chain on the snare drum. I basically know what it's doing. I can see I'm 6 to 1, more or less compressing more or less 4 dB, whatever it is. You know what I'm saying? I know that I'm adding off whatever I'm adding to that snare drum. So I'll just go in and just throw them on throw the hardware inserts on and just turn off the distressor plugin and turn off the EQ plugin and pretty much match, you know, or getting, you know, obviously I'll hear more when I get back to the studio and, you know, change it a bit because the studio's a studio rather than a room in my house. And, you know, that's basically it. It's pretty simple.
Okay. So I think we've got time for 2 more quick ones. So one that's been asked, and I think Michael, you know, said something about, you know, being able to use FaceTime or something when you're kind of communicating with your client, the artist. You know, they wanted to know, and this is from Bruno Modolo. How are you handling voice communication? I guess when you're, you know, with the remote working, is it FaceTime? Are there other things you're using to kind of facilitate that?
I use whatever they're comfortable with. You know, if they've got their, you know, we do this on their iPhone. Generally, is what's going on. That's FaceTime. If they want to use something different, you know, we have it all. It's whatever they're comfortable with. I mean, we usually suggest FaceTime, and then we go from there.
Okay.
You know, as long as I can see them, they can see me, and it's not eating up too much bandwidth. And that becomes an issue sometimes. Sometimes, you know, by doing video, it becomes really, really difficult and spotty, and this, you know, their bandwidth just isn't good enough to handle audio and video. And then at that point, I don't know that one is any more efficient than another. I think Skype and FaceTime, unless somebody knows better, they're all eating up the same kind of bandwidth. So, you know, then we go to audio if we have to. But,
yeah, so I think that the takeaway there is, you know, you're really doing what's most comfortable for the client, and then also taking into consideration bandwidth and, you know, whatever current limitations we have, right? Kind of it.
Yeah, you start off with what is ideal, and if they say that's, you know, that's what I like, that's what we use.
Yeah.
Who cares?
Thanks for that. So I think we've got time for one more quick one, and then Robert, I'll throw it back to you to kind of, you know, thank our guests, and then I'll do the quick wrap up. So Spencer, earlier you mentioned, you know, when you're getting stuff set up for Huron, you mentioned folder tracks, that you guys are using that now. But I'll start with you, Spencer, but anyone else who might want to answer, you know, how has that really kind of changed or helped your workflow, you know, using folder tracks in Pro Tools right now?
If you haven't upgraded, upgrade. It makes managing a session so much easier. The folder tracks, being able to use it like an aux, but being able to hide it so you don't have to go up and down the ladder all the time, particularly if you have a high track count on a session. And these days, you know, we definitely do typically from clients. It's incredibly helpful. Before folder tracks had a workflow, I'll just use drums as an example. We would have our kick and snare. If it's a live drum kit, if there's 3 mics on the snare, 3 mics on the kick, whatever it is, all those things routed into aux channels, and then those aux routed into a larger drum aux. And now with folders, it's so much easier to be able to, you know, not only just quickly collapse them, and then, but then also be able to manipulate them, like from an EQ and compression standpoint. It makes it a whole lot easier.
I couldn't be any happier. I mean, every time I'll be doing that, I'll go for now, I go, oh, this was so brilliant, because for me, I use all of that as a tape machine. So I've got them all down at the bottom, and then they all, you know, are routed up to the top where all my returns are, and I'm mixing on that. But quite often the blend might not be quite right. So I got to go find down there, and then to try and solo it, I have to go through hoops and loops, and now I just open up can change the blend. I can do clip gain. I can mute parts. I can do whatever I want right there. It's all right there in front of me. It's makes life so much easier. And when they first came out, you really couldn't do it on the S1 or the S6 yet. And then soon after they updated it, and you can, right? Or am I mis?
No, you can.
Oh,
You can
that's
go in the
correct.
S6 and the
Yeah,
S.
yeah, it's all
You just can't
updated
fill
now.
'em
So,
yet.
yeah, so it's completely natural. Avid's, right on top of it. So it's yeah, that was one of the greatest updates ever.
I can't agree more.
Thank you guys for that. With that, Robert, I'm going to turn it back over to you to kind of wrap up the panel, and I'll come back in at the end. Guys, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Robert, back to you for a minute.
Well, I just want to say a big thank you to all of our panelists, Michael and Fernando, Yaron and Spencer. This has been really cool. I hope that it's been helpful for our audience. I know that probably out of, running around 120, 130 at different times on the Zoom session, but I'm sure that there are many of you who are viewing on other social platforms. Thank you so much. This series is going to continue, and keep in touch with upcoming webinars. So once again, to all of our panelists, thank you so much.
Very welcome.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys. And yeah, like Robert said, we do have our next webinar will be scheduled, I believe, for August 4th. We'll be sending out an announcement. Of course, this one, if anyone missed it or you want to share this with your friends, we will have this available on demand relatively soon. And for those of you who registered, we'll be sending out a follow-up email. All the questions and everything that have been asked here, everything will be there transcribed and ready for you. But yeah, we will have this on demand on all of our platforms relatively soon. So guys, again, thank you. Thank you to our guests, and thank you to all of you. Again, please stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.